G'day and welcome to part 2 of the Befehls Panther. Today I'll be moving on to the smaller details and basic weathering to get the tank to a point where I'm happy with it on my shelf. The goal for the end result is for me to be content with it when sitting on my display shelf, as it's more than likely going to just be me looking at it. To start off with, I'll be using Citadel paints for most of the side equipment, with Leadbelcher being the primary steel or metal colour. I find Citadel's paints to be alright, though sometimes they can dry out before you've opened them, so in the future I'll be trying to switch to AK Interactive's line to see how I fare there. Moving on, after all of the steel bits are done, I paint the C-hooks in Eshin Grey, which will be later shaded and in my opinion looks decent when it's done this way. Now, given that I've seen the German tools and equipment painted in so many ways by other modelers, I personally choose to use 3 different colours for the timber on the shovels and sledge as an example. These 3 colours are Morghast Bone, Scrag Brown and Mornfang Brown, which like the Eshin Grey will be shaded later. And to quickly touch back onto the colouring of the equipment, I have seen people paint mid to late war tank extinguishers red, which the places I've looked at have all stated the extinguishers were generally left on the vehicle while the camo was being applied. When shading, I tend to generally use the liquid skill known as Nuln Oil along with Reikland Flesh Shade, also by Citadel. These bottles last quite a while and make it easy to get more of the detail out of the smaller areas before having a pigment applied over the top. Excuse me a moment. I looked up mid-paint and noticed a small periscope cover sitting by my tool sorter, and figured I'd quickly chuck it on to another side project, the Panther, before I forget again. Anyway, moving on to the start of the pigments. I like to use the range of pigments by Mig Jimenez and AK Interactive and find they're absolutely brilliant for not just 135 modelling, but modelling in general. All of the steel on the equipment and toe shackles will be polished metal, which I apply with a sponge brush and try to avoid the underside or darker areas to give it a bit more of a pop. Moving on to the oil on the wheels, I have a neat kit by AK Interactive that comes with engine grime, and I find it adds a nice underlayer before further weathering. Being fairly generous with the application adds to a more freshly serviced look I feel, which comes up nicely later. Starting the tracks, I use AK Interactive's enamel track wash and apply it where needed, mainly the areas of the tracks that will be seen when displayed. As a rule of thumb, I tend to place smoke and mirrors when detailing, because if you need to pick the model up or contort yourself to see the usually hidden areas, I don't bother wasting time or effort on them. Giving the wash a short while to dry, I like to add the ammo pigment fixer while it's slightly still wet, before moving on to foam brushing on the AK track rust pigment. This is because of the end result I'm looking for, which is just a personal preference. After the rust pigment has had a moment to sit, I will come along and use AK's dark steel pigment to give the tracks that nice heavy metal look, and this includes the spare tracks on the sides of the rear. Coming back along with a sponge brush, I use Ammo's Europe Earth to give the road wheels a little more pop before moving on to the muzzle brake. Using Tamiya's Weathering Kit B, I added a light coating of soot to give it the recently used look, along with just a touch on the exhausts. Finally, using Weathering Kit A by Tamiya, I went around and lightly brushed a bit of a mild dusting effect onto the green areas to not leave it too boring. Overall, this part of the build took roughly an hour and a half, and going further obviously would stretch out much further, especially if I was to delve into wear and tear. Ultimately, I like the result, which I feel is one of the most important things to consider. It could have been much more detailed, but I'm only aiming to enjoy myself, and the end result is for me. I will note that the barrel does have some damage, which seems to be the result of the glue interacting strangely while setting, and the jack is missing. I know it's here somewhere, but do you think I could find it while I was actively looking for it? Definitely not. You know how it goes. And that's about it for this one. I do hope you enjoyed this video and that it was of some use to you. Until the next one, cheers!